Hi, Peg Leg Page here, the One Foot Gamer. How's it going? I'm doing great. I think today we're going to continue along in my series of looking at things in the D&D universe logically and wondering why the existence of various things in campaign worlds seemingly do nothing to change their looks and functions from any other pre-industrial period. I thought I'd go over a list of about 8 things that should change the world a whole lot, but instead don't seem to change anything. Our first one up is statues. Now, let's face it. What do your players do when there's a statue in the room? They get really nervous, don't they? Then, for good reason. The number of monsters that look like statues but then animate and attack is very large. And if it's not going to animate or attack you, is it a petrified human? I mean, you've got Medusa and Gorgon out there. Just turning people to stone. And what you're going to get is the idea that freestanding statues would be seen as incredibly offensive and dangerous as a concept, and realistic statues would not be seen as a work of art. They would be seen as a sign that Medusa or a simple other similar creature has been nearby. No sculptor would refine their craft to such a level to create realistic statues, not when they'd just be seen as a petrified dead human. Statues would really only be created and used to cause fear, not as works of art. So I don't think you'd see many statues in your real D&D game worlds. Second up, graveyards. Now, in a world where there are a dozen different ways for the dead to rise from the grave and attack you, do you think there'd be any such thing as a graveyard anywhere? I don't think so. I think everyone who died would be immediately burned until nothing was left. And at the higher levels of society, you've also got the very real issues of the inheritance of wealth, titles, lands, and such. And how would those be affected by things like the raised dead spell, or reincarnation, or even speak with the dead? Now, while I'm sure the powerful Duke would love to have himself raised if he died, he certainly wouldn't want his father to come back from the dead and reclaim his title and lands. Nor would he want his dead enemies blabbing his secrets to the world via speak with the dead. One old strategy I read about in Dragon Magazine, I believe it was, is that, kingdoms might bury their greatest heroes when they passed away, along with a potion of longevity and a raised dead scroll. In case there's a time of true trouble, then you could bring a whole bunch of heroes back from the dead to help solve the problem. However, that'd be a real gamble for the ruler who did it, wouldn't it? Because say like your kingdom's facing major problems, how many of the people in the kingdom are going to blame the king for that? I mean, people are constantly blaming the president for whatever's going on, regardless of who the president or regardless of what is going on. They're constantly blaming that man, whoever that man or woman or cat is. So I think it'd be the same thing. They'd be blaming the king for what's going on. And I think many of these people would love to support that newly raised hero of old. If suddenly we brought George Washington back from the dead, do you think there might be a little bit of a movement to recall whoever the current ruler is and replace him with George? I think so. And if you've got a big problem, you're going to raise a lot of those people. There'd be a huge power shift to suddenly George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and I don't know if we hit Robin Hood and Genghis Khan and everybody else are suddenly living again. And many of the heroes, the raised heroes, might find fault in the ruler as well. And I bet a lot of them aren't going to want to lay back down and die again now that they've been brought back to life. They're going to hang around past whatever the crisis is, probably being more powerful than the king. And so I don't think the king would want that. So I don't think that plan would actually go down. Hey, if you've made it this far, can you hit that subscribe button? When I hit this record button a few minutes ago, I was 1 subscriber off my current goal. That 1 subscriber could be you. And that's the main reason I'm in this. All right, our third one, elves. While elves are slightly more powerful than most of their one-hit die human and demi-human competitors, humanoids, they take an insane amount of time to reproduce. Even many more, like multiples of even what dwarves take. And dwarves live in extremely defensible areas where they can't be attacked on all sides. Well, elves, however, they live in forests. Their generations are 200 years apart. The generations of their competition are 5 to 20 years apart. There's just no way elves wouldn't go extinct in such a dangerous world, particularly if anything like warfare broke out. The only way I could see elves really surviving as a species long term is if they lived almost solely on islands too far to easily sail to, which I'll get to that later. And they completely scoured those islands of all competing species and, large predators. Then elves might make it because they wouldn't have to fight anybody. However, there's a problem with sailing too. Number 4, ocean-going vessels. Crossing oceans with Renaissance or medieval-era sailing ships was already a ridiculously dangerous proposition before you brought monsters, Sahuagin and mermen and the other half-dozen species of underwater humanoids who like to attack human ships into this equation. And since some of these creatures and humanoids will actually desire the cargo on the ships, their attacks will be coordinated and intelligent and not just random. This makes the ocean too dangerous to cross to the point where true ocean ships will just never be developed. Boats will hug the shores and will likely never cross anything larger than a shallow inland sea. You're not going to get these big sailing galleons developed when everything that, goes out of sight of the shore gets taken down by a giant octopus or overrun by a Sahuagin. It's not going to happen. Number 5, some classes of weaponry. Now, people in your D&D worlds love to build castles and all sorts of things like that, but I'm going to bet most siege equipment would actually never be developed. Not in a world that already has mercenary giants, magic spells, and flying mounts. That kind of overwhelms the siege weapons, doesn't it? Giant is cheaper to hire. You can throw more rocks at a faster rate than the catapult can. This could also extend to gunpowder weapons in general. Most campaign worlds don't have them in the first place, but I don't know if reliable firearms would ever be perfected when better options already existed in the area of magic spells, leveled characters, and non-human troops. Because even in our world, it took hundreds of years in between when gunpowder started being used and it actually became better than a crossbow. And I don't know if that research would ever happen in a fantasy world. People generally research, improve, and perfect technologies that are superior to what already exists. And most game worlds that I've seen, they seem to be 100% stagnant as far as their technology goes, where nothing ever develops other than the rise and fall of how common magic is. In fact, most of them seem to be in a down phase from some more glorious past. But in the glorious past, it was just magic was more common. They weren't, driving cars around or anything like that. All right, next category. Traditional castles. The traditional castle is almost useless in stopping the sort of threats that it would face in a fantasy world. Magic spells, flying creatures, flying mounts, all sorts of non-human troops would make those impenetrable walls anything but impenetrable. If you don't think so, remember, all it takes is a low-level wizard to cast protection from normal missiles on a giant. That giant could tear down the castle gates then, or you could push siege ramp after siege ramp into place for the troops to just go over the walls. If the attackers have more spellcasters than the defenders, they can blanket the entire fortress in continual darkness spells. Then the defenders won't even be able to react to what's coming anymore. Castles would all have to be essentially entirely underground, or they could not be defended. Could be another reason why there's all those dungeons hanging around out there. It makes sense. The people in the past, they knew better than the people do now. Number 7. Any sort of traditional bank or money houses. You don't see this in every adventure or anything, but banks do crop up. The first one I remember seeing was the banker in Keep on the Borderlands. But if a game world has an economy sophisticated enough to need banking, then it can run into some problems. If you gather enough wealth in one known place in the D&D world, then it will cost you more money to defend that wealth than the wealth is worth in the first place. I'm going to have to assume that things like banks would have very little ready coin available, and almost all their deposits would be tied up in hard-to-steal things like shares of businesses, real estate, futures contract, anything but a whole bunch of gold bars that anybody with a decent amount of spellcasting could just come in and take. However, it's really hard to come up with a functioning fantasy economy in the first place when characters are always hauling in gold and gems, but they spend almost all of it on very esoteric, very expensive things like magic items, specialty character training, spell component, sages. You know, if you go down that rabbit hole, you end up creating a world that caters its entire economy to these, 1% adventurers because they're the ones with all the money. And that also would be almost unrecognizable. I'm not even sure how that would work. Finally, 8th, racism among the same species. I could be completely wrong about this, but I don't think the curly-headed humans of the mountains and the bald humans of the seashore are going to have all that much time and reason to hate each other in a world with 200 other completely alien humanoid species in it. There's no reason to place your enmity upon or blame your problems on the red-headed nomads of the steppes when you have actual goblins causing you problems instead. So I think that baseline human-on-human or elf-on-elf racism probably wouldn't exist at all. And if you know anybody who doesn't exist at all, why don't you tell them about this channel so they can subscribe to it? Thanks, and I hope to see you again soon.